The warning lights flashed red across the cockpit as Commander Sarah Chen's ship shook violently. She gripped the controls, trying to steady the small reconnaissance vessel as strange energy beams struck her hull. Through the viewport, she could see massive alien ships surrounding her, their sleek silver forms unlike anything in Earth's databases. Unknown vessel, you have entered Zephyrian Empire space without permission. A cold voice spoke through her communication system. The translation software worked perfectly, which surprised Sarah. These aliens had been monitoring human transmissions for some time. Sarah's mission had been simple. Earth needed to know what lay beyond their solar system. The new faster-than-light drive had finally made interstellar travel possible, and humanity was eager to explore. They had detected radio signals from this direction years ago, signals that suggested intelligent life. Now Sarah knew they had found it. "This is Commander Sarah Chen of the Earth Reconnaissance Fleet," she responded calmly. "We come in peace. We're explorers, not invaders." The alien voice laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "All species say they come in peace. Your ship will be disabled now. Do not resist and you will not be harmed." Sarah considered fighting, but her small ship carried only basic defensive systems. The alien vessels were enormous, bristling with weapons she couldn't identify. Her job was to gather information and return to Earth, not to start a war humanity couldn't win. The alien ships fired again, but this time the beams were different. Sarah's instruments went dark one by one. The engines died. Life support switched to emergency backup. Her ship was dead in space, floating helplessly between the alien vessels. A bright light filled the cockpit, and Sarah felt a strange tingling sensation. She looked down and watched her body become transparent. Some kind of transport beam, she realized. The aliens were bringing her aboard their ship. The light faded and Sarah found herself standing in a large metal room. The walls were smooth and silver, with no visible doors or windows. Strange symbols glowed along the ceiling, providing soft blue light. The air smelled clean but wrong, like a hospital mixed with something she couldn't identify. 3 aliens stood before her, and Sarah got her first close look at Earth's new neighbors. They were tall, perhaps 7 feet in height, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. Their faces were almost human, but their eyes were larger and completely black. They wore uniforms that looked like they were made from the same silver material as their ships. The alien in the center stepped forward. When he spoke, Sarah could see that his mouth didn't quite match the words she heard. The translation system was probably implanted in her head somehow. "I am Interrogator Prime Veltar of the Zephyrian Empire," the alien said. His voice was calm and professional, like a doctor explaining a procedure. "You are now a prisoner of the Empire. You will be taken to our detention facility, where you will be questioned about your species and your planet." Sarah straightened her shoulders and met his black eyes. "I'm Commander Sarah Chen. According to galactic law—" "There is no galactic law except Zephyrian law," Veltar interrupted. "We have ruled this section of space for over 1,000 years. Every species we have encountered has eventually joined our empire, either willingly or after proper conditioning." "Conditioning?" Sarah asked. Veltar's face showed what might have been a smile. "You will learn. Take her to Kepler Station." 2 guards moved forward. They were smaller than Veltar, but still much larger than Sarah. Their hands ended in claws that looked sharp enough to cut metal. Sarah didn't resist as they placed metal restraints around her wrists. The cuffs were warm and seemed to adjust themselves to fit perfectly. The guards led her through corridors that stretched longer than any building on Earth. They passed rooms filled with strange equipment and other aliens, working at stations Sarah couldn't understand. Everything was clean and efficient, like the inside of a computer. They stopped at another transport chamber. This one was larger, designed to move people between ships. Sarah felt the same tingling sensation, and suddenly she was standing in a different place entirely. Kepler Station was massive. Sarah could see through a large viewport that it was built in the shape of a wheel, spinning slowly in the darkness of space. Stars wheeled past the windows, but they were the wrong stars. She was far from home. "Welcome to your new home," one of the guards said. "You will stay here until Interrogator Prime Veltar is ready for you." They walked through more corridors, these ones lined with doors that had no handles or visible locks. Sarah counted the doors as they passed. Dozens of them. She wondered how many other aliens were imprisoned here, and what had happened to them. Her cell was small but not uncomfortable. There was a bed, a chair, and a small table. The wall showed images of what looked like peaceful landscapes from various worlds. A way to keep prisoners calm, Sarah guessed. The door sealed behind her with no sound. Sarah sat on the bed and tried to think. She was probably hundreds of light years from Earth. No one knew where she was. Her ship's automatic beacon wouldn't reach home for months even if it was still working. She was completely alone. But Sarah had trained for this possibility. Every human military officer learned what to do if captured by hostile forces. The key was to stay calm, observe everything, and look for opportunities. She was scared, but fear could be useful if she controlled it properly. She examined her cell carefully. The walls seemed solid, but she noticed small openings near the ceiling that probably carried air. The light came from panels that had no switches she could see. The bed was comfortable, the blanket soft. They wanted her healthy for questioning. Hours passed, or what felt like hours. There were no windows in her cell, no way to tell time. Sarah did exercises to stay alert and reviewed everything she had seen. The aliens were advanced, but they were also confident. Maybe too confident. A panel in the wall slid open and a tray of food appeared. Sarah was hungry, but she was also careful. The food looked safe enough. Something like bread, something like fruit, and a container of clear liquid that tasted like water. She ate slowly, paying attention to how the food affected her. No strange sensations, no dizziness. Either the food was safe or the aliens were very good at hiding poison. After eating, Sarah lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The images on the walls had changed, now showing what looked like cities on different worlds. All of them had the same silver architecture she had seen on the station. Zephyrian cities, she realized. They were showing her what planets looked like after the Empire took control. Sarah closed her eyes and thought about Earth. Green forests, blue oceans, the smell of rain. Her apartment in Denver with its view of the mountains. Her sister's children, who called her Aunt Sarah and always wanted to hear stories about space. She held these memories close, knowing she might need them in the days to come. The door to her cell opened without warning. Veltar stood in the doorway, no longer wearing his uniform. His new clothes were simpler, more practical. Behind him stood 2 guards. "Commander Chen," he said politely. "It is time for us to talk." Sarah stood up, keeping her face calm. She had known this moment would come. Everything she had trained for, everything she believed about human strength and resilience was about to be tested. "I'm ready," she said, and followed him out of the cell. The interrogation room was perfectly white. White walls, white floor, white ceiling, even white air that seemed to glow with its own light. Sarah sat in a chair that molded itself to her body. Holding her firmly but not painfully, across from her Veltar watched with those large black eyes. "Let us begin simply," Veltar said, his voice echoing strangely in the white space. "Tell me the location of your homeworld." Sarah had expected this question. "I'm Commander Sarah Chen, serial number 7749 Alpha Delta. That's all I'm required to tell you." Veltar made a note on a device that appeared in his hand from nowhere. "Commander Chen, you do not understand your situation. I have broken the minds of creatures from 47 different worlds. Some were physically stronger than your species. Some were more intelligent. All of them eventually told me everything I wanted to know." "Then you'll have to add humans to your collection," Sarah replied. Veltar touched something on his device. The room suddenly became completely dark. Not just dim, but absolutely black, as if Sarah had gone blind. She couldn't see her own hands. The silence was total too, as if all sound had been sucked out of the universe. Sarah had experienced sensory deprivation before, during her military training on Earth. She knew the tricks her mind would try to play on her. She began counting her heartbeats, timing her breathing, creating rhythm in the silence. She pictured her sister's face, her childhood home, the feeling of warm sunshine. Time passed. Sarah couldn't tell if it was minutes or hours. Her mind tried to create sounds and lights that weren't there, but she had learned to ignore these false signals. She focused on her memories, on the solid facts of her life, on the mission that had brought her here. The light returned suddenly, painful and bright. Veltar was still sitting across from her, but he looked surprised. "Interesting," he said. "Most species begin to hallucinate within 1 hour. You showed no signs of distress." "Disappointed?" Sarah asked. Veltar smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Not at all. I enjoy a challenge." The next session began differently. Sarah found herself back in the White Room, but this time she felt strange. Her heart was racing, her palms were sweating, and every shadow looked like it was moving. She recognized the symptoms immediately. Fear drugs, chemicals that made the brain think it was in terrible danger. "Now," Veltar said, "tell me about your planet's defenses." Sarah's body was screaming at her to run, to hide, to do anything except sit calmly. But her mind knew the fear was artificial. She had studied these techniques in training. She began the breathing exercises her instructors had taught her, slowing her heart rate through pure willpower. "Still nothing to say?" Veltar asked. "The weather was nice when I left Earth," Sarah said. "Sunny with a chance of rain." Veltar's eyes narrowed. He made another note on his device. Day after day, the sessions continued. Veltar tried pain amplifiers that made every touch feel like fire. Sarah gritted her teeth and endured, thinking about her training exercises where she had learned to separate her mind from physical discomfort. He tried reality distortion fields that made the room spin and change shape. Sarah closed her eyes and focused on her inner balance, the way she had learned during zero-gravity training. He showed her images of Earth being destroyed, cities burning, people screaming. Sarah knew they were fake. The aliens had never been to Earth, so they couldn't know what human cities really looked like. The buildings in the images were wrong, the people moved strangely. She almost felt insulted by how obvious the deception was. "Your resistance is remarkable," Veltar admitted after 2 weeks. "But every mind has a breaking point. I will find yours." Sarah noticed that Veltar was changing. He spent longer hours with her, arriving early and staying late. The other Zephyrians she saw in the hallways looked at him with concern. One day she overheard 2 guards talking about their Interrogator Prime's obsession with the human. She also noticed something else. Each technique Veltar used hurt less than the last time. Her body was adapting, building resistance to the pain drugs. Her mind was getting better at ignoring the fear chemicals. She was becoming stronger, not weaker. "You're failing," Sarah told Veltar during one session. "Your superiors must be asking questions." Veltar's hand tightened on his device. "I do not fail. I have never failed." "There's always a first time," Sarah said gently. That session lasted 18 hours. Veltar combined every technique he had used before, switching between them rapidly, trying to overwhelm her defenses. Pain, fear, darkness, spinning lights, horrible sounds, everything at once. Sarah endured. She thought about her training, about every difficult thing she had survived in her life. The death of her parents when she was young, the months of recovery after her shuttle crash, the night she had spent trapped in a collapsed building during the Mars colony disaster. She had survived all of these things. This was just one more challenge. When the session finally ended, Veltar looked exhausted. His skin had lost its shimmer and his large eyes seemed dull. "How?" he asked quietly. "How do you resist?" Sarah studied his face. For the first time, she saw something other than confidence there. She saw doubt, frustration, and something that looked almost like fear. "Maybe you're asking the wrong question," Sarah said. "What do you mean?" "Maybe the question isn't how I resist. Maybe it's why your techniques don't work." Veltar stared at her for a long moment. Then he stood and left the room without another word. That night, alone in her cell, Sarah thought about what she had seen in Veltar's face. The Zephyrian Empire had built its power on breaking other species. But what happened when they encountered someone who wouldn't break? What happened when their perfect system met something it couldn't handle? Sarah smiled for the first time since her capture. She was beginning to understand that she might have more power in this situation than she had realized. The next morning, Veltar didn't come for her. Or the next day. For a week, Sarah remained in her cell, eating the food that appeared and exercising to stay strong. She could hear activity in the corridors, voices speaking in urgent tones. Something was happening on Kepler Station. When Veltar finally returned, he looked different. Older somehow, less certain. He sat across from her in the white room, but he didn't activate any of his devices. "I have been studying your species," he said. "Your history, your culture, your psychology. I have learned disturbing things, such as, your people have survived things that would destroy most species. Wars, disasters, diseases that killed millions. Yet you continue to exist, to grow stronger. How is this possible?" Sarah leaned forward slightly. "What do you think?" "I think," Veltar said slowly, "that I have been trying to break something that is already broken, and something that has learned to heal from being broken." Sarah nodded. "Now you're asking the right questions." Sarah had been watching Veltar for weeks now, and she was beginning to understand him. Every time he used one of his torture devices, his left hand twitched slightly. When he was frustrated, a small muscle near his black eyes would tighten. When he was thinking hard, he would touch the base of his neck where a small scar was barely visible. Today, instead of answering his questions, Sarah decided to ask her own. "That scar on your neck," she said. "How did you get it?" Veltar's hand moved automatically to cover the scar, then stopped. "That is not relevant to our discussion." "Everything is relevant," Sarah replied. "You've been studying me for weeks. I've been studying you too. I am the interrogator here, not you." Sarah tilted her head. "Are you?" "Because it seems like you're the one who's troubled by our conversations. You look tired, Veltar. When was the last time you slept properly?" Veltar's large eyes blinked slowly. "Sleep is not important. Results are important. And how are those results going?" Sarah asked gently. "What do your superiors say about your progress with the human prisoner?" The muscle near Veltar's eye tightened. Sarah had hit something important. "They do not understand the complexity of your species," Veltar said. "Or maybe they're starting to wonder if their best interrogator is losing his touch." Veltar stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the white floor. "I have broken minds that were far stronger than yours. I have made proud warriors beg for mercy. I have turned loyal soldiers into willing slaves." "I believe you," Sarah said calmly. "The question is, why doesn't it work on me?" Veltar sat back down, his movements less controlled than usual. "You tell me." Sarah had been waiting for this moment. For weeks she had been the subject. Now she could become the investigator. "Tell me about the Zephyrian Empire," she said. "How long have you been conquering other species?" "Over 1,000 years. We bring order to chaos, civilization to primitive worlds, and before that, what were the Zephyrians like before they became conquerors?" Veltar was quiet for a long moment. "That history is not taught. It is not relevant, but you know it, don't you? You've studied the old records. What happened to your people that made them decide conquest was the only way to survive? We evolved beyond the weaknesses that plague other species." Sarah leaned forward. "That's not an answer. That's propaganda. What really happened, Veltar?" The interrogator's hands were shaking slightly. Sarah could see she was affecting him, but she pressed on carefully. She didn't want to push too hard too fast. "Your empire has a very specific way of breaking prisoners," she continued. "Sensory deprivation, fear drugs, pain amplification, reality distortion. These are sophisticated techniques. Who developed them? The science division has perfected these methods over centuries. But who were they tested on first? You can't develop torture techniques without subjects to practice on." Veltar's breathing was becoming faster. Sarah could see she was approaching something important. "Every interrogator in the Empire uses the same methods," she said. "You all learned from the same training. But someone had to develop that training. Someone had to be the first test subjects." "Stop," Veltar said quietly. "The Zephyrians tested these techniques on themselves, didn't they? On their own people. That's how they learned to break minds so effectively." "Stop. And you weren't always an interrogator, were you? That scar on your neck, that's where they put the control implant. You were a prisoner once." Veltar's hand flew to his neck, covering the scar completely. His black eyes were wide with something that might have been terror. "You were captured as a child," Sarah continued, her voice gentle now, "from one of the worlds the Empire conquered. They broke you, conditioned you, turned you into one of their tools. That's why you're so good at this job. You know what it feels like to have your mind destroyed and rebuilt." "I am Zephyrian," Veltar said, but his voice was weak. "I have always been Zephyrian." "No," Sarah said softly. "You're a victim who became a victimizer. They made you forget your real name, your real people, your real family. They turned you into a weapon against others like yourself." Veltar stood again, this time stumbling slightly. "These sessions are over. I will not return." "Veltar, wait." He stopped at the door but didn't turn around. "What was your name?" Sarah asked. "Before they changed it. What did your real family call you?" Veltar's shoulders shook. Then he left without answering. For 3 days, no one came to interrogate Sarah. She could hear unusual activity in the corridors, running footsteps, urgent conversations, the sound of security alerts. Something was happening on Kepler Station, and Sarah suspected she was the cause. When the door to her cell opened again, it wasn't Veltar who entered. It was a different Zephyrian, older and with more elaborate markings on his uniform. "I am Administrator Kethavar," he said. I oversee this facility. Interrogator Prime Veltar has been temporarily reassigned to other duties. Because he couldn't break me? Kethvar studied her with calculation. Because he has become compromised. He has been asking questions about Empire history that are not appropriate for his rank. Sarah felt a surge of hope. Her strategy was working. I will be conducting your interrogation myself, Kethvar continued. I assure you I will not make the same mistakes Veltar made. What mistakes were those? He began to see you as an individual rather than a subject. He allowed your questions to affect his thinking. I will not be so weak. Kethvar activated a device Sarah had never seen before. The white room suddenly filled with images. Scenes of Earth being attacked, human cities burning, people running in terror. But these images were different from the ones Veltar had shown her. They were more detailed, more realistic. We have been monitoring your planet for longer than you know, Kethvar said. These images are real. Our fleet is already on its way to Earth. Unless you provide us with your planet's defensive capabilities, your species will be destroyed. Sarah's heart raced, but she forced herself to think clearly. If you could attack Earth, you would have done it already. You need information about our defenses because you don't know what you're facing. Kethvar's expression didn't change. Your planet will fall within days. Then why do you need me to tell you anything? The administrator was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled coldly. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps we should simply destroy your world and be done with it. Go ahead, Sarah said. But you'll never learn the secret. What secret? Sarah smiled. The secret Veltar was starting to figure out. The secret that's going to destroy your empire. Explain. Your whole system depends on being able to break people. But what happens when you meet people who can't be broken? What happens when your torture techniques stop working? Kethvar leaned forward. Impossible. Everyone breaks eventually. Veltar thought so too. But I'm still here, still refusing to answer your questions. And now he's asking questions about Empire history. Questions about who the Zephyrians really are, and what was done to them. Sarah could see uncertainty in Kethvar's eyes. How many other species have you encountered who resisted your methods? She asked. How many prisoners have made your interrogators start questioning their orders? None, Kethvar said, but he sounded less sure. None that you know of. But the Empire is big, isn't it? Lots of facilities like this one. How would you know if other interrogators were having the same problems Veltar is having? Kethvar stood abruptly. These sessions are concluded. Already? But we were just getting to the interesting part. You will remain in your cell until we decide what to do with you. As he left, Sarah called after him. Ask Veltar about his real name. Ask him what he remembers from before the Empire took him. The door sealed shut, leaving Sarah alone. But she wasn't worried anymore. She could see the cracks forming in their perfect system. And once cracks appeared, they had a tendency to spread. Sarah had been alone in her cell for 5 days when Veltar returned. He looked terrible. His skin had lost its shimmer completely, and his black eyes seemed smaller, more uncertain. He moved slowly like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. You were right, he said without greeting. He sat heavily in the chair across from her bed. I have been researching. Using my security clearance to access old files, forgotten records. Sarah sat up. What did you find? My name, Veltar said quietly. My real name was Jorik. I was from a world called Nethys in the Outer Rim. The Empire conquered us when I was 7 years old. Sarah felt a mix of sadness and hope. Do you remember it? Your home world? Pieces, fragments. I remember my mother singing to me. I remember blue skies and purple grass. I remember hiding in a closet while explosions shook our house. Veltar's hands were trembling. They took the children who showed intelligence. They said we would be given better lives, educated to serve the Empire. They put the implants in our necks and began the conditioning. What kind of conditioning? Pain training. They would hurt us until we stopped crying, stopped asking for our parents. Fear conditioning, where they would terrorize us until we learned to accept terror as normal. Identity erasure, where they made us repeat Zephyrian names and histories until we forgot our own. Sarah watched Veltar's face as he spoke. She could see decades of buried pain surfacing. The worst part, he continued, was the empathy removal. They taught us that other beings were just objects to be used. They made us practice on prisoners, starting with small cruelties and building up to greater ones. By the time we became full interrogators, we had learned to enjoy causing pain. But you're remembering now, Sarah said. The conditioning is breaking down. Veltar looked at her with something like wonder. Because of you. Because you wouldn't break, I started questioning why my techniques weren't working. And when I started questioning, I started remembering. Sarah leaned forward. Tell me about humanity. What did your research reveal? Veltar pulled out a data device and activated it. Images appeared in the air between them. Pictures of Earth, of human history, of the long story of human civilization. Your species is fascinating, he said, and terrifying from the Empire's perspective. You have survived disasters that should have destroyed you completely. The images showed volcanic eruptions, ice ages, wars, plagues, asteroid impacts. Every few thousand years, something happens that kills most of your population. Yet you always survive, rebuild, grow stronger. It's not just survival, Sarah said. It's adaptation. Humans learn from suffering. Yes, Veltar agreed. Your history is filled with examples. The survivors of your great wars didn't just rebuild. They created better societies. The survivors of your plagues didn't just reproduce, they developed medicine. Every disaster taught your species something new. More images appeared. Hospitals, schools, art galleries, space stations. What confuses the Empire is that humans actively study trauma. You have entire sciences devoted to understanding pain, loss, and recovery. You teach your children to expect hardship and overcome it. Sarah nodded. We call it resilience. Every human grows up learning that bad things happen, but they can be survived and overcome. This is alien to Zephyrian thinking, Veltar said. The Empire believes that trauma breaks people permanently. That's why their techniques work on most species. But humans have turned trauma into a teacher. Veltar showed her more data. Your military training deliberately exposes soldiers to stress, pain, and fear. You practice being captured, tortured, isolated. What the Empire sees as punishment, humans see as preparation. We've learned that the mind, like the body, gets stronger when it's challenged, Sarah explained. A person who has never faced hardship will break easily. But someone who has survived difficulties and learned from them becomes very hard to break. There's more, Veltar said. Human culture celebrates survivors. Your stories, your movies, your books, they're filled with heroes who suffer terrible things but don't give up. You teach your children that the greatest virtue is to keep going when everything seems hopeless. Sarah thought about the stories she had grown up with. Tales of explorers who survived in the wilderness, soldiers who endured captivity, ordinary people who overcame extraordinary challenges. We believe that suffering can make you stronger if you choose to learn from it instead of being destroyed by it. This is why I could not break you, Veltar said with something like awe. I was trying to inflict trauma on someone whose entire species has learned to transform trauma into strength. I was trying to create fear in someone whose culture teaches that courage means acting despite fear. What about other humans? Sarah asked. If the Empire encounters more of my people? Veltar was quiet for a moment. That is what terrifies Administrator Kethavar. If one human can resist, perhaps all humans can resist. And if humans can teach their resistance to other species, the Empire's control would collapse, Sarah finished. Yes, the entire system depends on the ability to break prisoners. If that ability fails, if conquered species start to resist. Veltar showed her one final image. It was a map of Zephyrian space showing hundreds of conquered worlds. There are billions of beings under Empire control. Most of them were broken as children like I was. They serve because they have forgotten how to rebel. But if they remembered, revolution. The Empire has powerful weapons, but they are vastly outnumbered by their subjects. If the conquered species ever unified, Sarah felt a surge of excitement. You could teach them. You remember who you really are now. You could help others remember too. Veltar shook his head. I am just one person, and I am watched constantly. Any unusual behavior and I will be terminated. Then we need to be smart about it, Sarah said. We need to plant seeds that will grow on their own. What do you mean? Sarah smiled. Tell me about the other interrogators on this station. Are they like you? Captured children who were conditioned to serve? Most of them, yes. And do they ever question their methods when prisoners resist? Veltar thought about this. Sometimes. But they are taught to see resistance as a challenge to overcome, not a reason to doubt. What if they encountered multiple humans? What if they all started having the same problems you had with me? Understanding dawned in Veltar's eyes. You want to create a crisis. Force the interrogators to question their training. I want to create doubt. Sarah corrected. Doubt leads to questions. Questions lead to memories. And memories can break the strongest conditioning. Veltar was quiet for a long time, staring at the images floating between them. Finally he spoke. There is something else you should know. The Empire's fleet isn't really heading for Earth. Sarah's heart jumped. What? They don't know where Earth is. Your ship's navigation system was destroyed before we could extract the location. The images Kethver showed you were fabricated. Then why? Because they're afraid, Veltar said simply. For the first time in centuries, the Empire has encountered something they don't understand. They're trying to make you talk because they need to know what they're facing. Sarah felt relief flood through her, followed quickly by determination. Then we have time. Time to plant those seeds of doubt. How? Sarah looked at the map of conquered worlds, at the billions of enslaved beings who had forgotten their own names, their own histories, their own strength. We're going to remind them who they really are, she said, and we're going to start right here on Kepler Station. The plan began slowly, carefully. Veltar would return to his duties, but instead of trying to break prisoners, he would begin asking them questions about their homeworlds, their families, their lives before capture. He would listen to their stories and help them remember who they were. Start with the newer prisoners, Sarah advised during one of their secret meetings. The ones who haven't been conditioned as long. Their memories will be easier to recover. Veltar nodded. There's a Corvani female who was captured last month. She still asks for her children. Perfect. Don't interrogate her. Just talk to her. Ask about her children's names, what games they like to play, what songs she used to sing to them. Make her remember the love, not just the loss. 3 weeks later, Veltar reported success. Sarah, that's her real name, not the number the Empire assigned her. She's remembering everything. Yesterday she asked me why I was helping her instead of trying to break her. What did you tell her? I told her my real name. I told her about Nethys. She started crying, but they were tears of joy. She said she thought she was the only one who still remembered her old life. Word began to spread quietly through Kepler Station. Prisoners whispered to each other during exercise periods. A Thurian male remembered his mate's face. A young Xanthari recalled the taste of fruit from his homeworld's trees. Small memories at first, but they grew stronger each day. The other interrogators began to notice changes in their subjects. Prisoners who had been cooperative became defiant. Beings who had forgotten their names suddenly refused to answer to their prisoner numbers. There's something wrong with the conditioning protocols. Interrogator Zekthul complained to Administrator Kethvar. My subjects are becoming unmanageable. Mine too, added Interrogator Nulvesh. It's as if they're remembering things that should have been erased. Kethvar called a meeting of all senior staff. Sarah knew about it because Veltar had access to the communications. She listened through a device he had smuggled into her cell. We are experiencing a facility-wide breakdown in prisoner compliance, Kethvar announced. Multiple interrogators are reporting similar problems. Subjects are recovering suppressed memories and showing increased resistance to standard techniques. Could it be connected to the human prisoner? Asked someone Sarah didn't recognize. Possibly. Veltar has reported no progress with her interrogation. Perhaps her resistance is somehow contagious. Sarah smiled at that. In a way, it was contagious. Hope was always contagious. I recommend terminating the human immediately, another voice suggested. If she's the source of the problem, her removal should restore normal operations. Negative, Kethvar replied. The human represents valuable intelligence about her species. We cannot terminate her until we understand how her resistance works. That was Kethvar's mistake. His scientific curiosity would be his downfall. The next phase of the plan required more risk. Veltar began recruiting other interrogators, carefully choosing those who seemed most troubled by their recent failures. He started with Zekthul, who had been showing signs of stress. Tell me about your homeworld, Veltar said to him during a private moment. Zekthul looked shocked. I am Zephyrian. I have no homeworld but the Empire. Are you? Look at your reflection, Zekthul. Your bone structure, your skin tone. You're not the same subspecies as the ruling Zephyrians. Where do you think you really came from? It took 3 conversations, but eventually Zekthul remembered. His real name was Korvek. He was from the same world as Sarah, the prisoner he had been trying to break. When he realized he had been attempting to torture someone from his own homeworld, someone who might even be related to him, the shock broke his conditioning completely. One by one, the interrogators on Kepler Station began to remember their real identities. The effect spread to the guards, the technicians, even some of the administrative staff. The station's careful hierarchy began to crumble as beings who had thought themselves Zephyrian discovered they were actually survivors of conquered worlds. Administrator Kethavar tried to restore order through force, but his security force was falling apart. Half of his guards had recovered their original memories and were no longer willing to follow orders. The other half were confused and frightened by the chaos around them. Lock down all communication systems, Kethavar ordered. No one leaves this station. No one contacts the outside empire. But it was too late. Veltar had already sent coded messages to interrogators on other stations. Messages that included Sarah's techniques for recovering suppressed memories. The revolution was spreading beyond Kepler Station. The crisis came when Kethavar ordered all prisoners to be terminated to prevent further contamination. Veltar and the other awakened interrogators refused the order. For the first time in Empire history, station personnel were actively disobeying their administrators. "You are committing treason," Kethavar warned them. "The punishment is death." "Then we die as ourselves," Veltar replied. "Not as the Empire's slaves." The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but Sarah had one more card to play. She had asked Veltar to research Kethavar's background, and what they found was illuminating. "He's not a real Zephyrian either," Sarah announced when Veltar brought Kethavar to her cell for a final interrogation attempt. "Are you Administrator? Or should I call you by your real name?" Kethavar's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about. Your bone structure is wrong for a ruling class Zephyrian. You're from one of the conquered worlds, but unlike the others, you remember who you are. You've always remembered." Kethavar's hands were shaking. "Impossible. You chose to serve the Empire willingly. You betrayed your own people to gain power. How many beings from your homeworld have you helped break over the years? How many of your own kind have you destroyed?" "Stop," Kethavar whispered. "What was your world called before the Empire renamed it? What was your name before you chose to become a collaborator?" Kethavar collapsed into a chair, his face in his hands. "Thymol," he said finally. "My world was called Thymol and my name was Jorvik. I was captured when I was 12, but I was never broken. I pretended to be broken and they promoted me for my loyalty." "Why?" Sarah asked gently. "Because I was afraid. Because serving them was easier than fighting them. Because I thought survival was more important than dignity." Veltar stared at his former superior with a mixture of disgust and pity. "You've spent decades destroying other beings to protect yourself." "Yes," Kethavar admitted. "And I've hated myself for every moment of it." Sarah leaned forward. "It's not too late to stop. You can help us. You have administrative access to the entire station's communication systems. What would you have me do? Send a message to every station, every world in the Empire. Tell them what you've learned here. Tell them how to recover their memories. Give them permission to remember who they really are." Kethavar was quiet for a long time. Finally, he looked up at Sarah with something like hope in his eyes. "If I do this, the Empire will fall. Billions of beings will rebel. There will be chaos, war, death. There will also be freedom," Sarah replied. "And after the chaos comes the chance to build something better." 3 hours later, Kethavar's message went out across the Zephyrian Empire. It contained everything they had learned about memory recovery, about the true history of the conquered worlds, about the lies the Empire had built its power on. The response was immediate and overwhelming. On world after world, beings began to remember their real names, their real families, their real cultures. The Empire's control structure collapsed as its own servants turned against it. Some worlds erupted in violence as the newly awakened sought revenge against their oppressors. Others chose peaceful resistance, simply refusing to obey Empire orders. A few tried to negotiate new relationships with their former rulers, but everywhere the cages were being opened. The mental chains that had bound entire species for generations were finally breaking. Sarah stood at the observation deck of Kepler Station, looking out at the stars. Veltar joined her, no longer wearing his interrogator's uniform. He had put on simple clothes that reminded him of his homeworld. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you go home," Sarah said. "You find your people, help them rebuild. You teach them what you've learned about healing from trauma." "And you?" Sarah smiled. "I have a message to send to Earth. They need to know they're not alone out here. And they need to know that sometimes the best way to fight oppression isn't with weapons, but with the simple act of refusing to be broken." Behind them, the last prisoners were being released from their cells. Species that had been enemies under Empire rule were working together to repair the station, to plan for the future. It wouldn't be easy. Healing never was. But for the first time in centuries, it was possible. The human prisoner had indeed broken her captor's chains. But more than that, she had taught them how to break the chains they carried in their own minds. And that, Sarah knew, was a gift that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come.